All right, welcome. How are we doing today? All right. We follow the rules and regulations in the cafeteria? For those who were in the cafeteria? Okay. All right. As I was coming here just from Miss Iden's class, from Miss Iden's class, the freshmen think they need a tutorial on how to wear a face mask. A lot of noses. A lot of noses. So hopefully second hour message got out about making sure that we're following protocol, making sure that we are distancing, all that stuff, and in the cafeteria, making sure that we follow the rules and regulations, because the alternative is we'll probably be eating in my classroom. Oh boy. And I tell you what, if you're eating in Mr. Newcomb's classroom, I'm a talker. I'll be just talking a lot, perhaps. All right, all that good stuff. So hopefully our day is going well. I thought I saw some thumbs up and all that stuff. All right. Does anyone know the artist who came up with that? With that image of the Campbell soup cans? In the chat, or if you know. Because this, in some ways, defines the art style of the 60s. He took popular items, some of them are icons, and turned them into works of art. Just by doing that. His name is Andy Warhol. Has anyone heard of Andy Warhol? Okay. All right. Woo. So he's done that for a number of them: Marilyn Monroe, Che Guevara, come to my mind, Mickey Mouse, and of course the Campbell soup. But that also defines the 1960s as well, pop culture reflecting the time period as well. All right, so with that, today we will continue to look at youth protests, but before that, I have a little clip that's going to bring a little bit more depth into what the youth are digging into here. All right? And so when we watch this little clip, think about, what are students, again, focusing on, and is it possible for them to create what we'll call credible change to society here? All right, so let's take a look at this. And let me first, gotta mute it.
In the mid-1960s, the determination to challenge traditional boundaries seemed to be growing in almost every arena. Perhaps most striking was a broadening struggle for civil rights, a struggle that many whites now joined in large numbers. In the summer of 1964, hundreds of college students, white and black, headed south to Mississippi, where many blacks were still mired in a Jim Crow world of poverty and political impotence. These students from the North hoped to register black voters and establish so-called freedom schools to teach literacy skills to those who'd been denied them. They were traveling into a world where many people were set in their ways. President Lyndon Johnson warned the students that the federal government could not guarantee their safety.
They've received a lot of training in order to prepare them for life in Mississippi, which was not going to be very easy. It wasn't easy for us, and we tried to make it very clear to people. I mean, our lives are, in imminent danger every minute of the day.
When we crossed the line into Mississippi, and it said, "Mississippi welcomes you," it was the first time I felt really afraid.
In the first group to arrive in Mississippi were students Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney. Within days, all 3 of them were missing.
Bob Moses, who was the head of the Mississippi Summer Project, brought the group together, told us that they were missing, and it was clear to all of us that it was extremely likely that they were dead.
6 weeks after their disappearance, the 3 were discovered buried in an earthen dam, shot in the head. In that summer of 1964, the Ku Klux Klan was still trying to stop the forces of change. But among the students and in the homes and churches of the black community, the feeling grew stronger that change could not be prevented.
We went up to the home of a very poor black woman, sharecropper's shack. She had a bunch of kids. She came to the door, she looked at her feet, she said, yes, no, to everything we said. And we tried to persuade her to sign this. And it was very clear if she signed it, she might get thrown out of her home. After a few minutes of talking, she suddenly straightened up, looked us in the eyes, and said, I'll sign it. And she signed it. That's how powerful the movement was.
And the movement expanded to other causes at the end of the so-called Freedom Summer.
The First Amendment didn't apply to any campuses in the country. You couldn't give a speech without getting it cleared by the administration.
When Freedom Summer veterans at the University of California at Berkeley tried to recruit others to their cause, they were barred by university regents.
It just set off this explosion among the students, and people who had never had a political thought in their head just got fired by the idea that someone couldn't tell them when and where to say what they wanted to say.
United by what they saw as an injustice, thousands of students began a series of protests that lasted 8 weeks. When college officials threatened to expel several of the student leaders, the conflict reached a boiling point.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
You have to put your body on the wheels, and we're going to go in there and we're going to take over this building. And so when the crowd began to move, I just went with it.
First floor is filled, second floor is filled, and we are...
Some people looked a little scared because they'd never done anything like that before. I was scared.
I think we're telling you this thing, we got pissed off and we're sick and tired.
When the student takeover of the campus building resulted in more than 800 arrests, the university faculty finally weighed in on the side of the demonstrators. Cornered as they were, the regents granted free speech to the students. And thus began an era of confrontation at American universities.
In late 19
hear more of youth protests. All right, so again, I think we got a little sense here. Freedom Summer. All right, so we're looking here at Freedom Summer. Just for that little takeaway, youth protests. What were some little nuggets that were brought up, or kind of takeaways that we can arrive at about Freedom Summer here in youth protests? Anything that could be related to it. Those at home, feel free to put into the chat what you think. Is it all fun and games? Okay, so again, sometimes we might think, okay, it's fashionable to protest, and for many of them, this is like their first taste of protest, and the pushback. All right, there's going to be pushback here. But what is on the side of the youth here? What is something that plays in their favor? We got numbers. Numbers. Remember, these are the baby boomers now, and their numbers are exponentially more. So this popular protest is going to play to them, all right, because of their numbers. Yes, you arrest a few hundred, there's going to be more that's going to be willing to step up. Okay, and here the two issues that are being focused on was on civil rights as well as free speech. And things that we think are what we, in many ways, what we have, that we just naturally have. But it's the 1960s, you have this popular protest that is playing out. And it's playing out across all college campuses. And one thing, you know, those in here that do go on to college campuses, you'll see your share of protests. And it can be exciting to see. You know, maybe as a spectator, I think of the protests in the 1980s on the University of Minnesota campus. And Mr. Moran, him and I, we've always talked about the protests that had occurred at the University of Minnesota. And some of them are pretty spirited. And when the authorities show up, you know it's real. And when it gets violent, it's real. And we both had seen our share of violent protests on student campuses as well. And so therefore, the protest, you can have the views as the youth have, but they have to they understand that there is also a price, and the price is be arrested. What else? What's that? Sorry, no.
Being held.
Being held. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so we sometimes see that the youth protests in many ways view that they themselves are engaging in conflict, like the soldiers are engaging in conflict in Vietnam. Some of these youth are looking at they are engaging in conflict at home, though. That they view that they themselves are going to go to war, and the possibility that some are going to die, yes. And in the civil rights movement, we definitely do see that. In the Vietnam War protests, some will become casualties as well in trying to get us not to stay in that war. All right, so youth protests. This is one way to show one's dislike. But from what you're doing, what's another way in which youth can show their dislike for mainstream culture or for the mainstream way of thinking? What are some other ways that they can protest? And I'm looking on this list here. What are other ways in which the youth can protest and get their views out? Okay, so the music, all right, and there'll be a number of forms of it, but the rock and roll is it. And music, can music really change? Can it really change society? Say that again. Evolve, cause society to evolve. All right. I mean, realistically, if we think of the music of that time period or music of contemporary time, right, are they in some way, can some of this music pick on some of the issues of the time? Absolutely, it can. And the thing about music, though, is it's from the lens of the artist. They're picking up on what they think is the issue. And it's just a matter of not if it resonates with us. If you ask some of the musicians of that era, they would say that they are creating change through their music. It's creating a new sense of consciousness, which definitely is going to play out when we take a look at the counterculture. Okay. Any other thoughts here? Any other thoughts about this? Okay. Looking at your activity on the youth protests, are there any early takeaways that we have from that activity? Anything that kind of like stands out? Whether it's about the New Left, whether it's about liberation, People's Park, Vietnam War, environment. Tough crowd. What do you got? Okay. What was it about the SDS?
Well, I found that many of them were like from like universities, and a lot of the problems that they covered had to do with like things happening in like the universities that they found like corrupt policies and stuff like that.
Okay. True. All right. So the politicizing of the youth, it has been going on for some time already. You can even look in the 1950s. We had two presidential races in the 1950s. In 52, you had Eisenhower against Adlai Stevenson. In the 1956, you also had Eisenhower versus Adlai Stevenson. And if 18 to 20-year-olds, if they could have voted, they would have voted for Adlai Stevenson. They looked at Eisenhower as a person who was going to really expand the Cold War and our dependency on nuclear weapons and stuff like that. And so in the 1960s, with the SDS and the New Left and some of these other splinter political groups, it really picks up. But again, still, many of them that are speaking about changing the political system do not actually have a voice and the voice is to vote in that political system. It's going to take some time. All right, that's very interesting. Interesting point. Okay, so with that, you need to continue to work on the youth protests. And remember, if you want, you need to focus on 8 of the 12, but if you put some additional ones in there, you'll get some enrichment points for those. All right. And also remember that there are 2 big historical questions, BHQs, and focus on those pieces. All right. So I will give you time now to work on this. Those at home, you can stay on and ask questions, or you can exit. Just be aware that this is week 3, and the hex semester is going fast. And if you are missing any work, let's get that stuff in. All right. I will be sending out notices and reminders and such and talking with people. Okay. So with that, I'll cut you loose. Work on it. Those at home, stay on or exit.